necessity educated out of England, were brought up, and where I, being a promising young Protestant at that time, was sent to learn the French tongue from a native of Paris. Add to the singularity, Sir John," said Mr Haredale, "that some of you Protestants of promise are at this moment leagued in yonder building to prevent our having the surpassing and unheard of privilege of teaching our children to read and write, here, in this land, where thousands of us enter your service every year, and to preserve the freedom of which we die in bloody battles abroad, in heaps; and that others of you, to the number of some thousands, as I learn, are led on to look on all men of my creed as wolves and beasts of prey by this man Gashford. Add to it besides the bare fact that this man lives in society, walks the streets in broad day, I was about to say holds up his head, but that he does not, and it will be strange, and very strange, I grant you." "Oh, you are hard upon our friend," replied Sir John, with an engaging smile. "You are really very hard upon our friend." "Let him go on, Sir John," said Gashford, fumbling with his gloves. "Let him go on. I can make allowances, Sir John. I am honoured with your good opinion, and I can dispense with Mr Haredale's. Mr Haredale is a sufferer from the penal laws, and I can't expect his favour." "You have so much of my favour, sir," retorted Mr Haredale, with a bitter glance at the third party in their conversation, "that I am glad to see you in such good company. You are the essence of your great association in yourselves." "Now, there you mistake," said Sir John, in his most benignant way. "There, which is a most remarkable circumstance for a man of your punctuality and exactness, Haredale, you fall into error. I don't belong to the body. I have an immense respect for its members, but I don't belong to it, although I am, it is certainly true, the conscientious opponent of your being relieved. I feel it my duty to be so. It is a most unfortunate necessity, and cost me a bitter struggle. Will you try this box? If you don't object to a trifling infusion of a very chaste scent, you'll find its flavour exquisite." "I ask your pardon, Sir John," said Mr Haredale, declining the proffer with a motion of his hand, "for having ranked you among the humble instruments who are obvious and in all men's sight. I should have done more justice to your genius. Men of your capacity plot in secrecy and safety, and leave exposed posts to the duller wits." "Don't apologize for the world," replied Sir John sweetly. "Old friends like you and I may be allowed some freedoms, or the deuce is in it." Gashford, who had been very restless all this time, but had not once looked up, now turned to Sir John, and ventured to mutter something to the effect that he must go, or my lord would perhaps be waiting. "Don't distress yourself, good sir," said Mr Haredale. "I'll take my leave, and put you at your ease," which he was about to do without ceremony, when he was stayed by a buzz and murmur at the upper end of the hall, and looking in that direction saw Lord George Gordon coming on with a group of people round him. There was a lurking look of triumph, though very differently expressed, in the faces of his two companions, which made it a natural impulse on Mr Haredale's part not to give way before this leader, but to stand there while he passed. He drew himself up, and clasping his hands behind him, looked on with a proud and scornful aspect, while Lord George slowly advanced, for the press was great about him, towards the spot where they were standing. He had left the House of Commons but that moment, and had come straight down into the hall, bringing with him, as his custom was, intelligence of what had been said that night in reference to the Papists, and what petitions had been presented in their favour, and who had supported them, and when the bill was to be brought in, and when it would be advisable to present their own great Protestant petition. All this he told the persons about him in a loud voice and with great abundance of ungainly gesture. Those who were nearest him made comments to each other, and vented threats and murmurings. Those who were outside the crowd cried "Silence!" and "Stand back!" or closed in upon the rest, endeavouring to make a forcible exchange of places. And so they came driving on in a very disorderly and irregular way, as it is the manner of a crowd to do. When they were very near to where the Secretary, Sir John, and Mr Haredale stood, Lord George turned round, and making a few remarks of a sufficiently violent and incoherent kind, concluded with the usual sentiment, and called for 3 cheers to back it. While these were in the act of being given with great energy, he extricated himself from the press, and stepped up to Gashford's side. Both he and Sir John being well known to the populace, they fell back a little, and left the 4 standing together. "Mr Haredale, Lord George," said Sir John Chester, seeing that the nobleman regarded him with an inquisitive look, A Catholic gentleman, unfortunately, most unhappily a Catholic, but an esteemed acquaintance of mine, and once of Mr. Gashford's. My dear Haredale, this is Lord George Gordon." "I should have known that, had I been ignorant of his lordship's person," said Mr. Haredale. "I hope there is but one gentleman in England who, addressing an ignorant and excited throng, would speak of a large body of his fellow subjects in such injurious language as I heard this moment. For shame, my lord, for shame!" "I cannot talk to you, sir," replied Lord George in a loud voice, and waving his hand in a disturbed and agitated manner. "We have nothing in common." "We have much in common, many things, all that the Almighty gave us," said Mr. Haredale, "and common charity, not to say common sense and common decency, should teach you to refrain from these proceedings. If every one of those men had arms in their hands at this moment, as they have them in their heads, I would not leave this place without telling you that you disgrace your station." "I don't hear you, sir," he replied in the same manner as before. "I can't hear you. It is indifferent to me what you say. Don't retort, Gashford," for the secretary had made a show of wishing to do so. "I can hold no communion with the worshippers of idols." As he said this he glanced at Sir John, who lifted his hands and eyebrows as if deploring the intemperate conduct of Mr. Haredale, and smiled in admiration of the crowd and of their leader. "He retort!" cried Haredale. "Look you here, my lord, do you know this man?" Lord George replied by laying his hand upon the shoulder of his cringing secretary, and viewing him with a smile of confidence. "This man," said Mr. Haredale, eyeing him from top to toe, "who in his boyhood was a thief, and has been from that time to this a servile, false, and truckling knave, this man, who has crawled and crept through life, wounding the hands he licked and biting those he fawned upon, this sycophant, who never knew what honour, truth, or courage meant, who robbed his benefactor's daughter of her virtue, and married her to break her heart, and did it with stripes and cruelty, this creature who has whined at kitchen windows for the broken food, and begged for halfpence at our chapel doors, this apostle of the faith, whose tender conscience cannot bear the altars where his vicious life was publicly denounced. Do you know this man?" "Oh, really, you are very, very hard upon our friend," exclaimed Sir John. "Let Mr. Haredale go on," said Gashford, upon whose unwholesome face the perspiration had broken out during this speech in blotches of wet. "I don't mind him, Sir John. It's quite as indifferent to me what he says as it is to my lord. If he reviles my lord, as you have heard, Sir John, how can I hope to escape?" "It is not enough, my lord," Mr. Haredale continued, "that I, as good a gentleman as you, must hold my property, such as it is, by a trick at which the state connives because of these hard laws, and that we may not teach our youth in schools the common principles of right and wrong, but must we be denounced and ridden by such men as this? Here is a man to head your no popery cry. For shame! For shame!" The infatuated nobleman had glanced more than once at Sir John Chester, as if to inquire whether there was any truth in these statements concerning Gashford, and Sir John had as often plainly answered by a shrug or look, "Oh, dear me, no." He now said, in the same loud key and in the same strange manner as before, "I have nothing to say, sir, in reply, and no desire to hear anything more. I beg you won't obtrude your conversation or these personal attacks upon me. I shall not be deterred from doing my duty to my country and my countrymen by any such attempts, whether they proceed from emissaries of the Pope or not, I assure you. Come, Gashford." They had walked on a few paces while speaking, and were now at the hall door, through which they passed together. Mr. Haredale, without any leave-taking, turned away to the river stairs, which were close at hand, and hailed the only boatman who remained there. But the throng of people, the foremost of whom had heard every word that Lord George Gordon said, and among all of whom the rumour had been rapidly dispersed that the stranger was a Papist who was bearding him for his advocacy of the popular cause, came pouring out pell-mell, and forcing the nobleman, his secretary, and Sir John Chester on before them, so that they appeared to be at their head, crowded to the top of the stairs, where Mr. Haredale waited until the boat was ready, and there stood still, leaving him on a little clear space by himself. They were not silent, however, though inactive. At first some indistinct mutterings arose among them, which were followed by a hiss or two, and these swelled by degrees into a perfect storm. Then one voice said, "Down with the Papists!" and there was a pretty general cheer, but nothing more. After a lull of a few moments, one man cried out, "Stone him!" another, "Duck him!" Another